Oh, it's been a long summer.
I guess it has been, hasn't it?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Hi, Junior.
I'm back in your dungeon.
Oh, yeah. When did you get here?
I don't know, 20 minutes ago?
We just ate goose.
We did eat goose.
Yeah.
I caught a bullet in my teeth.
Yes, you did. Well, there we go.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Canuckanomicon. I am your host, Benjamin Jr. Wandio. This is my producer and father, Todd Dirty Clyde Wandio, also known as Crossing Clay. Welcome back. And yes, I just doxed myself, so have fun.
Salutations.
So, it's been a long while. It's been 4 months.
We have not been idle, however.
No, we did.
It'll seem to you that we've been idle.
We've been wrestling with technical crap.
Yeah.
Trying to get our between season show off the ground.
Yeah.
We finally did. It's very lo-fi.
It is, and I like that.
Yeah.
Well, the most did you hear my last episode installment?
No.
Of the Hinterland Who's a Who?
Which one was it?
The one where I play the chanter at the end?
Yes, I did hear that. That one.
That was magical.
That was magical. It was beautiful.
Maybe we can use that soundbite on all of them instead of our.
Too late now, because 2 others are already up with us just humming into the microphone like a couple of goddamn chumps. Oh, boy. So we are back for our full season. We'll probably be going until sometime next year, at least. Definitely until at least June, I want to say. I want to say we'll record until June. Weekly until June. We'll be in your ears. We got a bit of a buffer so that we can take some time off for Christmas and crap. But you didn't come here to hear me talk about what I did this summer. You came here to hear me talk about Mordecai Richler. Canada has a deep history of art and writing that often goes ignored by the rest of the world. While we know such influential names as Robert Frost, Jack Kerouac, and Herman Melville, there are few authors from Canada who are known as widely abroad as they are. Not to say that some of our works haven't had popularity abroad. Susanna Moody's Roughing It in the Bush is a great example. It was hugely popular in the United States at the time she was publishing it as a series of installments. And Robert W. Service's poem, The Cremation of Sam McGee, is a massive hit, especially among fans of Johnny Cash, who famously did a recording of it.
Did he?
Yeah.
My dad's favorite poet is Robert Service.
I do recall that. He had a lot of his works sitting around the house. Still, the names of Canadian literary authors are often lost in the shuffle between their enormous American and British counterparts. So to open our second season, I decided to find a Canadian author who has been hugely influential on the landscape of Canadian writing, and yet who most haven't actually heard of. I am, of course, talking about Mordecai Richler. He was a Canadian novelist who grew up in what may well be the most Canadian city in the country, Montreal.
Which is really kind of funny, because they don't even, they're only partly Canadian. Some days they want to be Canadian.
Montreal, I think, is always very, very Canadian.
It's more metropolitan. It's more,
exactly.
It's more like we are a nation unto ourselves as part of Canada.
Yeah. And I would say while there has been large separatist sentiment in Quebec, it's never really been much in Montreal, where there's a lot of Anglo-Canadians.
Yeah.
As well as French Canadians. So I tend to think that Montrealers tend to view themselves as more actually Canadian because they kind of live in that weird microcosm, or that weird kind of place in Canada where they're both French and Canadian and English, and as we're going to find out, Jewish and Indian, and it's a hugely metropolitan city. And I think Mordecai Richler, coming from there, has a very Canadian voice in a lot of ways. Richler was born in January 27th, 1931. His family were Orthodox Jews and lived in a neighborhood in a predominantly Jewish area of Montreal. Richler's grandparents had actually emigrated in the early 20th century from Eastern Europe, his maternal grandfather having been a prominent Hasidic rabbi from Poland named Judah Rosenberg. Rosenberg moved to Canada in 1912 and eventually landed in Montreal in 1919. Mordecai's paternal grandfather was far more blue-collar, having moved to Canada in 1904 from Galicia, a province in Eastern Europe, and worked in the scrap metal business as a scrap dealer.
That's where my family came from, Galicia.
Really?
Yes.
I didn't realize that. I always just thought of us as Ukrainian.
Well, that area of Europe was constantly being fought over. In fact, it was the first province of Poland at the time, taken over in the Blitzkrieg.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense. Because in the biography I was reading, it just says Galicia is a province in Eastern Europe. It doesn't say who it belongs to, which makes a lot of sense if it's been changing hands back and forth over the years.
Yeah.
Many of the Jews leaving Europe for North America were coming for one pretty obvious reason, especially if you're coming from Eastern Europe, where it was it was especially bad. Jews in Europe weren't exactly what you would call a well-loved people, and that anti-Semitism was only a couple decades away from reaching a terrible boiling point with the rise of Nazism and the breakout of World War II. But Canada was not immune to anti-Semitism. While Montreal was a very cosmopolitan city, even in the 1930s, anti-Semitism still very much existed here. It was enough that Richler referred to the neighborhood where he grew up as the ghetto. As such, Richler grew up existing on the outer edges of mainstream Canadian culture. According to M.G. Vasanji, the author of the biography Mordecai Richler, part of the Exceptional Canadians series, even at 10, Richler had this grim, almost noir detective aura about him that he would carry on into his adult years. If you've seen portraits of Mordecai Richler as an adult, he's got this cigarette hanging out of his mouth. He's got this kind of, unkempt mop of hair. He's got the big high-collared jackets on. He looks like a noir detective.
Yeah, that's a quintessential Canadian writer look as well.
It is. And he really embodies that. And as we'll see, he was very much the bohemian author as well. By the time Richler was 10, Jews were the largest immigrant group in Montreal, numbering at 41,000 individuals. Most would move into Richler's neighborhood where, as Vasanji puts it, everyone spoke Yiddish and some spoke nothing but. Even within this closed neighborhood, however, there was still a clear class divide between the rich and the poor. The poorest lived in the areas around Clark Street, with the slightly less poor living in Mordecai Richler's neighborhood, St. Urbain Street. The richest, however, lived in Outremont. The ghetto, as Richler called it, was truly a microcosm of modern society, with the poor being forced into these crappy neighborhoods and the rich living in these much nicer neighborhoods. This group wasn't completely insular, however. After all, there was no law that kept them in these neighborhoods like there was in Eastern Europe. Instead, it was simply familiarity and, a shared culture that kept them here. They interacted with the wider Montreal community as well. The Jewish community actually served as a buffer between the two largest and definitely warring factions in the city. Richler described in his book, The Street, if the Main was the poor man's street, it It was also a dividing line. Below, the French Canadians. Above, some distance above, the dreaded WASPs.
Yeah.
The WASPs, of course, refers to white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. For Richler, the world is really divided into two main groups. One group, the WASPs, the other group, everyone else. In his book, he looks on the French not as an out-and-out enemy, although he did war with them quite a bit in his adult years, but rather as a competitor for WASP affection. He describes them as being, like us, poor and coarse with large families and spoke English badly. He says they fought the French stereotype for stereotype. If many of them believed the Saint-Urbain Jew was secretly rich and manipulating the black market, then my typical French was a moronic gum chewer. Which also just goes to show you that these current theories of, conspiracy theories of Jews controlling the world are not new. And they existed even back then in the 30s and 40s. And in the 70s when he was primarily doing most of his writing. 50s and 60s and 70s. So, in other words, every conspiracy making the rounds right now is just the same shit shoveled differently. Richler's Montreal was like many cities now, a place rife with class and racial stripes, seeking to make sense of its identity in an ever-changing world. Richler's family life was tumultuous. His parents divorced when he was 13. However, they couldn't afford a proper divorce, which had to go through the legislature. So instead, the marriage was annulled, citing false claims that his mother, Lily, had married underage without her father's consent. As a result, Richler would boast to his friends at school that he was a bastard. This is a great way to grow up.
I love it.
At 19, Richler decided to follow in the footsteps of literary exiles. After his tumultuous childhood, Richler exiled himself to Paris, France. In France, Mordecai lived the life of many mid-20th century Bohemian authors, squatting in grubby, unheated apartments and making his way in the world living la vie bohème. He worked hard and tirelessly at his writing in Paris, and partied probably equally as hard. He also wrote home frequently, making requests for money, typewriting supplies, and very briefly describing his day and what he did. He also spent a bit of time in Spain, but had to leave quickly after getting into a fight over a girl with a former Nazi SS officer in Ibiza, who then accused him of being a spy. Let's keep in mind that at this time, I'm pretty sure Spain was still fascist.
It was, and it's interesting because writers at the time were, it's coming out now, were the spy agency's go-to for an agent.
They were often included in society in a lot of ways.
And they would cross international boundaries easily.
Yeah. Mordecai Richler himself had a hard time not being accused of being a spy because he was a weird recluse to begin with.
Yeah.
He was kind of in his neighborhood in Ibiza where he was staying, he had already become kind of a sort of a strange fixture in the social atmosphere, this mysterious French-Canadian Jew with his, gloomy looks and
crazy hair
and everything. And his keeping himself shut up for hours on end writing. So in 1951, while still abroad, Richler actually finished writing his first novel. He wrote to his family, "Dear Dad and Sarah, I finished my novel this morning. Cheers and all that. I feel empty and exhausted and clean. Never write, old boy. Do anything, but never write." He had taken up this affectation in his letters where he wrote in all lowercase. So if you read his letters, you get this almost, in my generation, we would call it emo sense from his writing. It's like those terrible emo memes that go up that just say, life is only what you make it to be. Love everything.
Yeah.
Is the best.
Yeah, but he was taking on more of that beatnik attitude, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This is that time. It's the 50s. So after writing this self-congratulatory letter to his dad and I'm presuming sister or stepmother, he made his customary request for cash, and then also offered to send them some tablecloths and napkins and other fancy things from France. While this novel was never published in this form, already in the existing typescript, Basanji, the biographer, notes that the themes that would be prevalent throughout Mordecai's literary career were already here. Namely, Richler struggling with being Jewish in a world that hates Jews, and whether to abandon that and assimilate into mainstream WASP society or not. He tried shopping around the novel in its original form but couldn't get it published. After a few revisions, however, it would eventually be published as The Acrobats in 1954. It was a different style from the compact novels that he would publish in his later life, but it was still a first and very important success for him. It would be published again in 1955 under a different title, Wicked We Love, the same year that Richler would publish his second work, Son of a Smaller Hero. Richler from here would go on to become a prolific and influential author, as I mentioned before. His books had a difficult time finding critical acceptance in Quebec, however, for reasons that I think should be patently obvious. Not only was he a Jew, and during this period there was still a very aggressive anti-Semitic sentiment in the province, but he also frequently put himself and his writing on the front lines of the battle against Quebec separatism and extreme right-wing nationalist movements that were forming in Quebec. His 1992 book, O Canada, O Quebec, A Requiem for a Divided Country, spoke directly on the issue of Quebec's language laws and caused him to receive death threats. One woman named Nadia Khoury also noted that there seemed to be an undercurrent within much of the more official criticism he received, which often painted him as not a real Quebecer. Even as late as 2010, 10 years after he died, Richler was stirring up controversy. When a petition was put forward to the Montreal city government to rename a street, park, or building in Richler's old neighborhood after him, the city council refused on the grounds that it would, quote-unquote, ruin the heritage of the community. Oh, gee, I wonder what that heritage is.
Yeah.
Forget the fact that Richler was one of Canada's most acclaimed and prolific literary authors. Obviously, eventually they were forced under media pressure to acquiesce and decided to build a gazebo in his honor. A project which wasn't completed until 2016. It took 6 years for them to build a goddamn gazebo.
The Mordecai Richler matchstick gazebo.
So make of that what you will, but I can almost guarantee you that there was definitely among the old white guys that were no doubt running the Montreal city government at the time a distaste for Mordecai Richler and his anti-French and Jewish nature.
Yeah.
So, what books of Richler's gained him such acclaim? Well, some more pedestrian critics might point you to The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, which is a powerful satirical piece detailing the realities of anti-Semitism in Montreal in the late 50s. Or they might be so bold as to point you to his 1997 book, Barney's Version, a bold piece featuring a story filtered through the mind of a man in an altered state, then edited later by his son, giving you not one, but two unreliable narrators. But not I, for I am a real fan of Mordecai Richler. And I will tell you what book you should check out, right after this quick break. The Canuckonomicon is a production of Crossing Clay Studios, and by studios, I mean my dad's basement. Indeed, we pay for every bit of work, every book, every piece of broken equipment out of our own pockets. But we do it so we can keep providing you with these stories from Canada for free. But if you can spare a couple dollars here or there, why don't you head over to Ko-fi ko-fi.com/Canuckonomicon. So it's ko-fi.com/Canuckonomicon or patreon.com/Canuckonomicon. The Ko-Fi link will let you make a one-time contribution to our project, helping us to replace and upgrade equipment, or buy us coffee, or beer, or both. Patreon will also allow you to keep helping us from month to month with a monthly contribution that you make for fun rewards such as exclusive episodes, artwork, and me just saying what a great and awesome person you are for giving us cash.
I'm working on my silk screening skills.
There you go. So you might get a silk screen
Chimera Goose.
But if you can't afford to give us any money, then do us a huge favor. Leave us a review on iTunes, share our page on Twitter, @Canuckonomicon, spread the word on Facebook, basically just pimp us out like mad to all your friends and family. We don't do this for money. We do this because we want to share these stories with as many people as we can. And that's how you can help us do just that. Now, I'm going to give you a special message from one of our friends in the indie podcast community. Do you like bad movies? Do you hate bad movies? Either way, check out What Were They Thinking? A podcast about the movies you love to hate or just the worst of the worst. Nathan and Brendan present a different bad movie each week. Watch it and break it down so you don't have to. Available on all podcatchers, you can find them on Facebook and Twitter at WWTT Podcast. And back to the show. So let me tell you about the circumstances when I read my first Mordecai Richler novel. I couldn't tell you precisely how old I was. It was definitely in the single digits, the first decade of my life.
He was a wunderkind.
I was a wunderkind. I was quite young, that much I do remember. My paternal grandmother, you see, was a librarian. And these grandparents had decided to actually take their RV out for a ride to Drumheller with me and my sister. Now, obviously, young kids need a story to help settle them down for the day, and I particularly loved stories. And so my grandmother pulled out a thin novel. This novel was, of course, Jacob Tutu Meets the Hooded Fang. It was the first in a series of children's novels penned in the 1970s by Richler. His cutting and sardonic wit is packaged into a child-friendly delivery, and the stories are fantastical adventures featuring talking animals, giants, and evil witches. It includes characters with names such as X Barnaby Dinglebat, Buford Orville Gaylord Pugh, Mrs. Sour Pickles, and Miss Darling Sweetie Pie. I, of course, didn't realize at the time that I was reading the seminal work of one of Canada's greatest authors. I thought I was just reading a fun zanies kids book about a kid who gets kidnapped and imprisoned by an evil giant. So when I had to study The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz in university as part of my Canadian Lit course, I didn't make the connection between that author and his sharp social observations of an oppressed people, and the author who wrote one of my favorite books as a kid. But they are indeed the same person, which makes sense. Richler had a huge family. He had 6 kids, and so it does indeed make sense that he would write a novel for kids. Still, Richler is and remains one of Canada's truest national treasures. So that's our story on Mordecai Richler.
Coming up, the fist fight between Morley Callahan and Ernest Hemingway. No, really, there was one.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
I can't remember the details. I have to go back into the vault and dig that one up. But I found it in my. I found an interview with Morley Callahan, another Canadian writer, asking about the fist fight between he and Hemingway, and he had always downplayed it.
Yeah,
they were part of the expat group in Paris, and they were hard drinkers.
Well, you know what? Maybe we will have to do that as our next episode. Why don't you dig that up and send me what you got on it?
You betcha I will.
Alrighty. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back in action. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you didn't mind the little ad plug towards the end there. I just like to support my friends in the indie podcast community. Follow us on Facebook, or not on Facebook, on Twitter. I'm not on Facebook. Screw Facebook. Nobody uses that anymore.
Well, people do use it, but I don't know what for.
I think mostly to send text messages to one another.
Yeah, well, that's how I use it.
That's pretty much how I use it, too. So follow us on Twitter at Canuckonomicon. Guys, we have a long season ahead of us, but I hope you'll stick around for it. I hope you'll spread the word. I'm just so excited to be back in the studio. So thank you for coming, and keep your eyes open.
Mm-hmm. Take care of one another.
Canuckonomicon is a production of Crossing Clay Studios. We can be found on Twitter at Canuckonomicon, and you can contact us through email at canuckonomicon@gmail.com. Please be sure to share us with your friends and family, and keep your eyes open.